Welcome to the Humble ISD Advanced Learning Podcast, where our goal is to talk about anything and everything related to advanced learning in less time than it takes you to get from home to school or work. I'm Dr. Tong Uticrit, the Director of Advanced Learning for Humble ISD. Today, we're continuing the conversation around what makes a class advanced and specifically focusing in on our secondary advanced classes. See, if you've been following along in our show, you know that there's a variety of different curriculum that are available for secondary students. So you think about advanced classes, advanced placement classes, dual credit, international baccalaureate. I mean, there's so many different options for our kids. So what else can students expect related to the actual instruction in the middle and high school levels? Joining me today for the conversation is Mr. Parker Tredick, a senior trainer for J. Taylor Education and the Center for Depth and Complexity. Welcome on, Parker.
Thanks for having me. This is pretty cool. I like your setup.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. So we previously did an episode with John Gould, who's the president for the Center for Depth and Complexity. And so if you missed that show or haven't listened to it yet, I'd highly recommend you go back and listen to that one so that you can build some background for today's conversation with Parker. See, we're super excited to have Parker join us today. So can you give our listeners an idea as to your specific background?
I was a biology, chem, and physics teacher where I co-taught with the algebra and geometry at the same time while we did everything project-based learning. The whole thing, though, really what made every of my experience in my classroom, just kind of background, is really the foundational level is depth and complexity. That's kind of the engine that makes it go. And then really for Avid and Wicker especially kind of give that structure for my stuff, right? I'm doing notes, but what's the process with the notes? Depth and complexity, it just marries perfectly. So that's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, and so what brought you to J. Taylor specifically, the Center for Depth and Complexity?
Back in the day when Betty Gould and Dr. Kaplan kind of came up with this idea back in the late 80s, early 90s, my mom was one of the original people that started piloting that. So growing up as a kid, I basically was guinea pigged with this too, just like John was. I'm sure he mentioned that in his story. So I kind of didn't have a choice, but I used this with teachers at my school, and then I used it by myself when my teachers didn't use it. When I was in middle and high school, I got voluntold because my mom's a teacher, so I got to go get unpaid labor for some grading and things and going to help teach in her class. So that was super cool. So I used the icons with them. And then in college, I was what's called a supplemental instructor at Cal State Fullerton. So I was for a entry-level history course or courses that have a high fail rate. Basically, it's like outside tutoring. So I was doing tutoring, but using depth and complexity to help do that. And then obviously as a teacher, marrying the stuff that I did in my class. And then now I'm the lead trainer and curriculum writer. So
that's awesome. So Parker, you recently had a chance to work with a group of our middle and high school teachers in what we're calling our secondary advanced learning framework. Can you give us that high-level overview of what that looks like?
So with this, the goal, what we're kind of do is how do we marry kind of the two initiatives, which is, we have Wicker, we have Avid, and how do we take that and use depth and complexity to kind of create just more thinking? Right, so we're using Avid and Wicker strategies kind of as a baseline, and then really we're using those proven strategies, things that work, your district's been doing for a while, and then using depth and complexity, one for the differentiation piece, because it naturally differentiates super well, and then also kind of giving more choice, giving more, just more tools for teachers. So really the goal, kind of what we talked about as we came in, was how do we take this really, especially for the higher level advanced learning academic classes for sure, the classes that are already difficult. And how do we, I think you said it perfectly when I was there, I think that was back in June, where you said, these classes are already difficult, right? The content's super hard. What's even harder, though, is they go to 7 different classes or more where every other teacher's doing a different process. That's the beauty for me where this marries, which is depth and complexity and the Wicker strategies are really things that kind of create a common process, so then the heavy lift is only on the content that's already difficult, and the process becomes more natural, right? It's how to think and how to organize and how to be a student. Right, and then depth and complexity added in kind of adds a whole another layer. That way, the heavy lift just is on the content. So, when you said that back in June, I was like, "That's awesome." That's basically what the whole point of this is, right?
Well, and what's great about that too is it still allows our teachers the autonomy that they want to be able to put their own flair to it, right? Because it's a thinking tool. It's not scripted lessons, right? It's not like, hey, you have to do. It's more of a way of thinking. And what John and we talked about too was that it's low energy but high fidelity, right? Our teachers are able to do this in such a way that it's not super labor intensive on them, which allows them that time to then help address misconceptions, help come alongside some students that are struggling and not have to spend so much time on what we talked about where it's direct teach.
What this does, though, is frees me up, puts the onus on the kids, because the expectation is they are thinking, and we're not just saying, "All right, you're going to go think." It's now thinking with structure, and then moving forward, we're using these like awesome tools together. So yeah, it really frees you up to meet the needs, because you're the only teacher. Your individual needs, strengths, your backgrounds, like you got to be able to do that, right? It really frees your teachers up to do what they need to do, which is to get the kids to be successful.
We want to integrate all these research-backed, high-yield strategies that come along with Avid's Wicker model, right? So for those that aren't familiar with Avid's Wicker model, we do have an episode on that a few episodes ago. Go check that out, where we talk about all the research that informs everything that happens in Avid, from the focus note-taking process, collaborative structures. When you talk about all of the different things that make Wicker what it is, it's all of the research-backed strategies that have been shown to be effective year over year. And so we take those high yield instructional strategies, and now we blend it with high yield thinking strategies of depth and complexity, right? So we can raise the bar for our kids and create some pain in the brain, I think, is the center.
That's kind of that's our motto here. Really, is the onus should be on the kids, and if they're not, you've already been to high school, you don't need to go back, right? They need to be doing the thinking.
So when you think about the work that's been done, how have you seen evidence of this pain in the brain sort of thinking?
So it starts with just like a lot of times when for this job, my whole thing is I go around and I observe hundreds and hundreds of classrooms. I have a really unique 1,000-foot view of just tons of districts, simply by just putting the onus back on the kids, by simply just asking them a question or asking them to think. Also, when we do these strategies and cause that pain in the brain, the things that we notice is by you simply just using the icon, it helps. It's paradoxical because it does two things at once. It's really cool because it makes it more clear for the kids and for you, but also it helps differentiate and extend the learning. So what I mean by that is, and why I love depth and complexity, is the whole point is, we think that as a teacher, as we're going to teach this lesson, in a middle school, we're going to do the Constitution, and where it's all about the rules of the Constitution. We know what process we want to go, but the students may not, right? So number one way to grow students and have them think is be clear and have expectations of what they want, while simultaneously challenging them to meet those expectations and using depth and complexity as options to say, well, what are we going to do now with these different ways to think? The process becomes natural for them. They are expected to think, right? And using these strategies really kind of marries that together really well.
So I know you've had the opportunity to see different districts at different stages of implementation of depth and complexity. But can you tell us a little bit more about our approach with blending both Avid's Wicker and depth and complexity? Is it unique? Is it not unique? What are you seeing there?
So I think for you guys, you definitely are the most intentional when it comes to explicitly calling out we are going to do Avid and Wicker with this. So your guys' experience, what I really like is it's the intentionality. Is the Avid is kind of, and the Wicker is the what you're going to do, and then the depth and complexity is the how, right? And that's the process on top of that. The results you're getting are amazing. Right, and it's not like this is some magic process. It's just we are taking thinking, being more intentional about it. So when I say unique, yes, with it being so intentional, because it's clear, right? When I go to your district, I know the expectation is I'm going to use these Wicker strategies, and how am I going to differentiate it? Well, depth and complexity is going to do that. Other schools, they're doing these kinds of Wicker-esque things, right, all day long, but really not having that universal approach. It's the intentionality. And
so when you think about walking into a classroom that is using this approach to learning, what are some things that you would look for, listen for, to say that this is actually different than a typical classroom?
Number one thing is who's talking. So biggest indicator for me is if you set this up correctly and if you did it right, my baseline for what I look is 20-80. So 20% me talking or less and 80% kids talking. Yes, there's a time and place for us to talk, but if I walk into a class and see the students engaging, talking, using the structure, right? It's not just talking to talk. There's a method to the madness behind it. So what I'm doing is it's intentional collaboration, intentional talking. But that's my number one indicator when I walk into a classroom is if the students are doing the work.
Well, and to your point too, it's not just the being forced to talk, right? But the students are engaged in the talking, right? It gives them a focus for, okay, here's my purpose for engaging in this sort of collaboration or engaging with this conversation right now is I have a focused purpose with this depth and complexity, or if we're jigsawing this out using a Wicker strategy, right? It focuses it so that I can effectively engage as a student as well.
Yeah. So for example, we're doing focus notes, right? We're going to take our notes but why? Why do I take notes? Well, adding depth, and as we're watching this video, you are going to take notes on the patterns over time. That's not, making it easier. It's making it more focused for the kids while it's more open-ended. The beauty of this too is that if you're doing this, is everybody, the expectation is thinking, but everybody at every level, it meets them where they're at. Right, because as we're watching a video, the patterns over time that you notice might be different than mine, but we all have a skin in the game. We can all talk to each other. So the expectation is, at the end of the day, thinking. That's really kind of my baseline. Is if I walk in there, you're using this to facilitate thinking. Students are doing the majority of the work. Then I would say this is a very good classroom on its way to being where it should be.
Well, and you think about it too. To your point, right? Is part of that note-taking process is also being able to make your notes and use your notes. So if the first time that I go through my notes and I start advanced classes, you're going to take notes, right? So, but if I'm looking the first time for maybe some patterns that I see, I can go back and revisit those notes later on with a different lens of depth and complexity and say, okay, now not only did I identify and look for patterns, but along with that, are there different perspectives that are here, right? So history is a good example where I could say, okay, what's the perspective of the Revolutionary War from the British, right?
Yeah.
Or from a British loyalist on the U.S., on the American side, right?
100%. And like in a math example, same exact thing. Like, we could use perspective at the end of the lesson. Yeah, you did the problems, but explain it to a 5-year-old how you would do these problems. It just gives the kids a challenge, but also you're not letting them out in the cold. You're giving them a purpose for learning, a reason, right? Why am I reading this article? What do you want me to look for? If my goal for as a science teacher is to have them look for the laws, like Newton's 3 laws and see where they're applied, then as a kid, I'm like, I don't really know what they want or what that means. But if I said, you're going to do the rules and where they're across disciplines, now it gives me an access point where I'm like, oh, that's not that hard. I can talk about this. We can do this, right?
Because I'll take it back to the conversation we had with John too, is the research behind why this works is all these various lenses are areas in which people need to build expertise in order to be considered an expert, right? So no matter what it is, if we're looking at Revolutionary War, and it just so happens that patterns happens to come out of my stack, well, sure, I need to look at patterns to build expertise in the Revolutionary War. But later on, I'm also going to need to look at ethics. I'm also going to need to look at what's the language that's being utilized here. So it's not just, the power behind it, right, is because all those are building blocks to mastery of expertise.
Right, in order to be an expert, and that's where, like John talked about probably as a ton, right, if you want to go back and listen to that. But really the whole point is where this came from is disciplinarians, and they looked at all these processes, and every subject area does the same thing. Especially at the secondary level, we kind of silo our subjects, but elementary, they don't do that. Right, but within a science classroom, math classroom, it's interdisciplinary. But really, the analogy I like to use, or the metaphor, whatever it is the plate is the same. Right, we're looking for the patterns to find the rules in a math or science or history class. What's on the plate is different. Right, the content's the only thing that's different, but the methodologies, the processes are the same. Right.
So, Parker, what would be a piece of advice that you would give to a teacher, a parent, a student who's engaging with our advanced courses using this approach?
The whole point is deeper thinking, right? And that's kind of the goal. Is for if I'm a parent or if I'm a student, I want that, right? Because especially if I'm a parent and my student's in an AP class, my expectation is not, yes, we want them to pass the AP test at the end of the year, but we really want well-rounded individuals who can get into college or be college in career or do what they decide to do. We just want functioning human beings that can think and are successful. This is how to do that, because really the goal is the strategies and skills that they're learning inside your guys' setup is that they take it and whatever they decide to do in their life, that's what they do with it.
Well, and to your point too, I'll tell a story a little bit. We went into a classroom recently, a high school classroom. It'll remain unnamed, right? But we polled some of the students, like, hey, what do you think about utilizing depth and complexity in your class? And I will always remember this. The student looked me square in the eye and said, I absolutely hate it. And I was like, okay, tell me more, right? Tell me more about why you hate it so much. She's like, because I just want my teacher to tell me the answer. But I think the phrase that the student used was, I actually have to think now. Because the teacher is utilizing this approach, the pain in the brain is happening on the student side. To your point, right? What parent doesn't want their kid to be able to truly be able to think deeply on their own?
Right, but the goal for this is if we have our kids constantly, evaluating, judging, critiquing, when they get that AP test, they're going to be fine, right? If they get into the real world, that's really the skills that you have to do, right? Very rarely, especially if you have a phone in your pocket, this changed the game because you can look up anything. It's what do you do with the information? How do you apply it? Especially now with, all the advances in technology, people with AI and stuff, like all these things, people are like, we need people that can think, right? Because that's really the indicator.
Yeah. Well, Parker, thanks for coming on today. We're truly excited about the learning that's happening here in our advanced courses here in Humble ISD. We appreciate you and the Center for Depth and Complexity, and really, Parker, you and the work that you've done directly in helping to equip and train our teachers. That's all the time we have today with the Advanced Learning Podcast. You can follow us on social media on Twitter at HumbleISD_ADV. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can be notified when we drop a new episode talking about anything and everything related to advanced learning. This is Dr. Tong Uticrit, and this has been the Humble ISD Advanced Learning Podcast, keeping you ahead of the learning curve in Humble ISD.